What is up, grinders? Welcome to another episode of the MMA Crunch Time Before Lock. UFC 293 ADESANYA, Strickland. Kind of a decent slate. I mean, GPP, you can get some leverage, John. Squirrel Patrol back for some tournament takes, back for some loving, man. There's a lot of contests out there still to be filled. But I look at this slate more of like a leverage slate than anything. I mean, you start with the main event, you decide what you're going to do, then you can kind of target some heavyweight fights that should be ending, some crazy wild action fights where there's some volatility. But the only thing we're missing a women's fight. Where's the women's fight? The ugly women's MMA.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that until you just said it right now. You're right. Yeah, no women's fights on the card. We got the Aussie edition of the of UFC. There's some intrigue here. It's a little bit of a it's a big UFC pay-per-view, but it's the Saturday night before football. And so there's some contests that aren't filling as people are have their eyes on tomorrow or whatever. So it's a good time to get in that lobby and see what's going on. So they have like the regular pay-per-view sized contests, and there could be some value out there. There's some intrigue on this card, like as far as I'm concerned. There's some like you said, there's some volatile fights with some guys that are maybe a little bit less known than some of the obviously the main event and co-main event fighters. I have a pretty strong take that I've kind of developed just today on the main event, and then we've seen some pretty strong line movement in one of the fights. The Shane Young, Gabriel Miranda fight. And I haven't seen line movement like this since Derek Minner. So I'm anxious to see what happens.
That's a bold claim, Squirrel. That's a bold statement.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying it's the biggest line movement I've seen since in about a year and a half.
It seems like a lot of people like to back grapplers nowadays. Isn't that really the real big thing? It seems like Gabriel Miranda fits that grappling. I don't even think it's my starting point. I'm just going off of what you just said there. People like to back the Gabriel Mirandas that grapple. They like to back the Anton Tarkalis. A lot of the betting markets continue to go towards those grappling-based fighters. And for fantasy-wise, they're going to be chalky regardless. So, it kind of sucks our play Miranda got smoked. Now he's stone chalk. But, what's your thoughts on that? Grappling pays the bills. It's just sometimes like taking that leverage spot is scary because, he can be limited if he gets taken down in the first round or whoever you go against these grapplers. Overall thoughts on that? I like my grapplers just like you do.
Yeah. So I'm going overweight Miranda. I actually think that it's an interesting DFS development because I think a lot of the projections don't update based off of like very sharp line movement the day of the fight. And so I think a lot of people, and obviously there's a lot of UFC fans, the people watching the show, and they're going to know like, hey, Miranda's like favored on DraftKings now by a little bit at just 7,600. Like that was not true yesterday. And, so if you're watching the show, I think it's good, to go and see, maybe I swap to Miranda, or swap off of Young. The projections all, around the industry all have Young projected stronger than Miranda. So that's a little bit of an interesting wrinkle on the slate.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get those likes up, continue to like it and share it with a friend too. I mean, why not? We're giving you some nice free content on UFC 293. This is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. If you're in a legal sports betting state and take advantage of their awesome bonus offer. New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets plus $100 off. Sunday ticket. Terms and conditions apply. Win some MMA money, right? That's what we're going to do for you. Maybe not promise, but we're going to give you some plays that we like to get you to that promised land and get $100 off a Sunday ticket. I'm all in for that, man. I like watching some football, getting some money down. Going to be a great weekend of sports. But I'm going to start with how I am evaluating the slate, John. And I'm going to see if you're doing the same thing that I am. That wrinkle of our boy Miranda is a little bit frustrating, but I was there anyways. So I think you obviously start with the main event. You decide what you're going to do there. But then after that, there's really, Miranda was in that mid-range fights that I really like. But I think the starting point has to be in that Anton Turkalj and Tyson Pedro fight because that's your next decision point. A lot of lineups lead you to this range. And people are going to slam in Anton Turkalj. He's a grapple heavy fighter. I think he had like 58 points last time in a loss. He just doesn't have a lot of striking in his back pocket. I understand the love for him, but like Tyson Pedro is a finisher, man. And he's now with the City Kickboxing guys, I believe, from not being with them. So like I look at Pedro as a really, really interesting upside first round type play. Turkalj has been durable, but the deeper the fight goes, Turkalj probably will score well. And then I think Pedro's equity kind of falls off after that, second, third round. But what's your take on that one? Because I really think mid-range is where there's a lot of upside. That you set fight, first fight of the night, Turkalj, the Shane Young fight, and then Jenkins. It seems like those fights, matching those pieces are where I'm going to start my builds.
Yeah, I think we're on a similar page. I like Tyson Pedro more than Turkalj. He's from Sydney. I mean, I kind of joked about it in my article a little bit, but it's not that much of a joke. They're like, the Vancouver card, all Canadian fighters won. and then was it in Paris last week? I think there was at least one decision. Was it Nora Cornell? It's a little bit of a question.
Almost all the Canadians won.
Yeah. Well, they have to.
Right. But the Canadians are just naturally, talented anyway. But yeah, I mean, you see home field advantage in all sports, right? Like nobody questions home field advantage for the Denver Nuggets. And it's like Tyson Pedro is from Sydney. It seems just kind of not logical that the fans are going to be behind him. Maybe that's going to help a little bit. And in a sport where it can go to the judges' scorecards and they have to evaluate who did more damage with their punches. I mean, that's obviously going to have an impact, just like it has with NBA referees, right? When they're trying to decide from a charge and an offensive foul or defensive foul, right? So yeah, I like Tyson Pedro. He's
Me too.
Potentially going to be getting the home cooking. I think he's going to score better. I think I like him to win this fight. Even on a neutral field, right? Neutral octagon. I like him to win. So yeah, I've got more Pedro than Turkalj.
The only thing I'd be concerned is if Turkalj comes out hot and stalls Pedro, like against the cage, gets a takedown. That would be the only concern. But right above, below, whatever you want to say, Giuseppe, first fight of the night, Crosby, two unknown commodities, John, that can make or break this slate. I think Crosby's going to be a guy long-term we're going to want to target his fights. And that means him or his opponent, because I think he's right there for the taking. That's good for fantasy. The one thing I'm a little interested in is Giuseppe's, like, last time I checked, plus 150 inside the distance, 8,400. I really like that. It looked like Crosby was a little bit deeper of a number, but that's a fight that's going to differentiate off that Miranda love that we know he's going to be super high owned now.
Right. So I've got more Giuseppe than Crosby. I think he's the favorite. I don't really, now you're talking about it, I don't have as much of this fight as I wish I did, which might be a modification I make, because I do think you're right. I think you guys talked about it on the Ground and Pound podcast. This is going to be an action fight. This is going to be a fight where there's going to be points scored, even if there's not a finish, and there may just very well be a finish as well. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Trevor Peak Mariscal fights from Jacksonville, like in June, where there wasn't a finish. There's just a ton of punches. And two guys that are just going to go at it. And Mariscal is back on this card as well. So yeah, it's an action fight. It's a fight you probably want to get a piece of. I actually wish I was a little bit heavier on it than I am, which might be an adjustment that I make. And that's kind of one of the fights I was referencing when I said, like, yeah, there could be some action, and these guys aren't as well known as some of the other fighters.
Exactly. The commodities, we don't know what we're going to get. Game log hunting still exists in MMA, and especially on big cards when there's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there's another fight. I'm going to say an X factor to this whole entire slate is two grappler-based fights. We have Jenkins and Malarkey. Okay, Malarkey is kind of a fantasy guy that everybody loves. I think he's a commodity. People think he's grapple heavy. But that fight, McDessie is not fantasy relevant. He slows the pace down, John. He just doesn't do enough. And he really just, his opponents end up just drawn into nothingness. They might outvolume him. And this is going to sound crazy, but I would almost want John McDessie over Malarkey on this slate. I wish Malarkey was like 40% owned, right? But McDessie does hit hard. He doesn't have a lot of volume, but what a quick turnaround for a guy who just got knocked out as massive chalk. And I mentioned Jack Jenkins. I'm going to throw that name in there too. A guy that can mix things up. He's an X factor for me on this slate. If he hits a ceiling performance, I wouldn't be surprised. He has a guy that, Jenkins is moving up the rankings, should be moving up. This is a setup fight to get him a decent finish, get him a great performance, and moving him up the charts. 8,700. You might not see this type of price tag for him ever again.
Yeah, I think you're a little bit higher on Jenkins than I am. I mean, I'm right about even with the field, I think. I mean, he's a guy that just wins a lot of fights with leg kicks. I don't necessarily know how I feel about, in terms of fantasy scoring. And then Mariscal, I mean, it's really high volume. I mean, so he got 100 points in his win, against Trevor Peak. It was over 108 DraftKings points. And that there wasn't a finish in that fight. It was just volume. And so, I like Mariscal at 7,500. I think a little bit more than Jenkins at 8,700. Jenkins just doesn't fit salary wise for me on a lot of the lineups. And then Malarkey, I can definitely see either way. I mean, I've got a little bit more Malarkey than Jenkins. He's got it with a 70% chance to win the fight. And I think McDessie is a little bit older, right?
He's been 6 injuries like over the past 5 years. It's not good. The optics are not good.
Yeah, so a little bit higher on Malarkey, I think, than you are, and a little bit lower on Jenkins. But neither one of those guys is like a primary target for me.
Yeah, and I think that would be why I think they're interesting. I mean, 25% owned from Malarkey, Jenkins 25. Like, they're just not the heavyweight bangers, which I'm pivoting to right now, John. We have 2 heavyweight fights that are probably going to dictate the whole entire slate and absorb all that ownership that I talked about. Perfect segue. We have Justin Tafa and Austin Lane, and then we have the Volkov versus Tuivasa. Tuivasa probably out of all of those guys has the best name value, I would say. Highest owned is probably going to be Tafa just because he's got that first round equity. It's a rematch. Austin Lane, I was on last time. The fight, it's a weird one because I could see anything happening here. I'm more apt to play the underdogs on this slate just to give me a little bit of salary relief. Mix and match. Austin Lane, I think, becomes an X factor the deeper the fight goes because I think he's got more tools to win the fight second, third round, John. Survive the first round from Justin Tafa. I don't think he's that great. And then Volkov, I feel like, has such a narrow scoring window. Like, he's got to get that first round equity. Therefore, I think a decision is in play for Tuivasa. Home cooking. People think it's going to finish. Why not, right? I mean, that's a crazy take, right? But hang in there and throw some heavies, man.
Yeah. I have a lot more Tuivasa than I have Volkov. Volkov's a good fighter, but I mean, Tuivasa might be one of the most popular men in Sydney, Australia, right? he's fighting in the co-main event. I think if it goes to decision, Volkov's cooked. I have more Tuivasa. I mean, I like Volkov. I obviously have some Volkov. I think he can win a first round finish.
How do you look at Austin Lane leverage? Is that a spot that you would attack in GPP? Because, you get off that Tuivasa name value. The interesting thing I saw was Austin Lane was 7,400 in this initial matchup. People need to look at this and say, hey, it's a rematch. We didn't see anything. It was an eye poke, awful eye poke, one of the worst we've seen. But the optics of this thing is very weird because Tafa was like, give me my win money. I won the fight. And he's like, he's in a weird case. And then Austin Lane was in his backyard. Now they're shipping him to Australia. He's got everything to lose. But you're getting $200 less from where he was in the first fight. He was 74 the first.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like both sides of this fight. I'm going to have a lot of this fight in DFS, and I'm just hoping it doesn't go to the decision. Tough is nearly 50% to get a first round win. I like Lane as leverage. I think Tough will be heavily owned. I'm still going to try to be overweight. I mean, I think you should be owning him at least to his first round finish odds, right? And I'm probably not the only person who's going to have that thought. And so I've got a lot of Austin Lane as leverage. I don't like Lane as much as I did at the first fight, back in June, because you're right. He's a former Jacksonville Jaguar that was fighting in Jacksonville. So Yeah, I liked Lean in the first fight in Jacksonville, and he was a heavy underdog then. Now I believe he's a heavier underdog now, which like leads to the $200 price decrease, and he's got to go to Sydney, Australia, and fight Tafa. But anyway, and like these heavyweight fights, anything can happen. I mean, these are fights that end in one punch.
I'm not surprised if it goes, both of these fight go 3 rounds and there's nothing to be had. That's why it's a weird dynamic on this card with these two fights that are going to absorb so much ownership.
Yeah. And one thing though about Austin Lane is that, and both Austin Lane and Tuivasa, right down there in the salary, rankings, if it does go to a decision, if they do win like an 80-something point decision, that still puts them in the discussion for the winning lineup, right? Where it's going to be much tougher for Tafa or Volkov to get there if they're not getting a first round finish.
So how do you quantify or qualify this one as a money line type of fight card or a upside? Because I do think the upside's all over this card, but I do think you need winners. That's the problem on this slate.
So like and we'll get to the main event, but my take on this card is basically, I think the way to play this card, especially on DraftKings, is I'm going to be underweight Adesanya by a lot. And then I'm using that money. There's a big $9,700 difference. Don't love Haqparast. He's 9,500. So, but he's probably not going to score that well either. So I'm like underweight both of those fighters, and I'm using the savings to try to get an extra, what I think will be an extra winner onto my lineups.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating because there's two guys up top, 9,300, 9,200, Cape and Olberg. They're not guys I really historically like to target. I mean, I can make a case that Olberg's probably better. He's got better volume. And once he sees somebody hurt, he'll go for it and he'll let off like 100-piece combo and try to take him out of there. But Cap is like, I wish he wasn't on this slate, John. Let's be honest. 9,300. He doesn't do anything until he kills you. And do I want to bet into that? I don't know, because he's way, way more skilled than his opponent. And during weigh-ins, he's been like in his face, like it looks like he's going to bring it, and there's levels to this. But I think at 40% ownership, I'm going to hold my breath and not play it. It's terrifying. It's terrifying because I think his window is just first round, a second round finish. There's no grappling. It's slow paced striking. He's going to keep distance. He's got multiple knockdown equity. That's about it. And I don't know if I'm playing into it.
Interesting. It sounds like you're maybe a little bit higher on Adesanya than I am.
I would say so.
Yeah, I'm playing like Izzy to just get a not a very high scoring win. Like I think in his decision victories, he averages about 85. Like the 5-round decision.
It's gross.
Yeah, about 85 points. And there's a chance he gets a first round knockout, and I'm playing Izzy at about his first round knockout odds, which are not very high. It's a possibility. It could happen, and that's obviously going to score a ton of points. But if it goes, a third round finish, fourth round finish, fifth round finish, or decision, it may not score that well. Fifth round decision probably gives him his next best shot after a first round knockout to land on the winning lineup, because then he's adding more and more volume. But yeah, my play for this card is basically saying I think Kopp or Olberg or Radke are going to outscore Adesanya in wins.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk brings up a good point in the YouTube chat. Dos Santos going to bring the pace. Kopp's going to be in the war. And if that's the case, I understand it. Multiple knockdowns, tons of volume. That makes sense. And it's not like you're going to get to Haqparast. You and I are never going to get there. In Olberg, like I say, Jung might be one of the more interesting plays because we have seen Olberg gas out before. We have seen him down the stretch not really put it together. He just slows down so much. So like, I think he might be one of the more interesting leverage plays, but I can't get behind it. Like, he hasn't looked good at all. I don't know how to handle that one, but there's one fight we haven't even talked about. Blood Diamond's back. I thought he was cut. How the hell is Blood Diamond still in the UFC, John? Is he an exciting fighter? Because he's not exciting. He's cost me so much money. Can he cost me money again?
Yeah, he's one of the toughest fighters to get the odds on, right? Because like he's listed under a bunch of different names. And, like sometimes it's Blood Diamond, sometimes it's Makessa. So I've seen like Mike Diamond. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the UFC in and out like you and Liam do. I haven't heard a good word on Blood Diamond. This listening to different shows this week. So then and that's obviously giving Radke, Charlie Radke, pretty good odds for first round finish. So yeah, he's going to be one of my highest owned fighters. I've got a sprinkle of Blood Diamond in there. Especially in the 150.
You have to. That's the
Yeah, you
problem.
have to.
It's like he's not good. He has the better striking by a mile. He should against Radke, but even that Radke is one of those fighters that will fight like what's in front of him, and he doesn't always go for the takedowns. He doesn't aggressively wrestle. So it's like, don't be a bonehead. Don't box with a guy that's way better at kickboxing with. I mean, frustrating, really frustrating fight to break down because there's ways that fight busts and doesn't hit optimal. And there's also a way where Radke takes him down 4 times in the first and submits him.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing is just the total lack of ground game, and that's something that can rack up points for your opponent, right? If Radke can get him down, there's ground and pound possibilities. There's just control time. So that's a fight I'm targeting, but not a lot of the Blood Diamond side.
Yeah, and I'm the wild guy that's going to say, how is there a world where that main event goes 5 rounds and both guys score a zillion points? Because I think if there's a slate, this is the one. But I don't personally. Here's my real take. I think Adesanya takes him out within 2. I don't think Strickland has as good a chin as people imagine. What was it? The Alex Pereira fight. He stood right in front of him with like this weird like defense and just got clocked, boom, done. And Izzy still hits hard. He doesn't have the best volume in the world, but I see that same thing freezing up in the big lights. And on the same time, I could see this thing going 5 rounds, and at 6,500, he scores 75 points, and Adesanya scores whatever, who the hell knows what he scores.
Yeah, so I put it in my my lineup HQ tag on Strickland. What is it? Adesanya's opponents in 5 round losses are averaging almost 60 points, like 60 DK points.
That's enough.
Yeah, at 6,500, that might be enough. So I like Strickland a little bit more than Adesanya. Izzy could get him out of there in the first 2 rounds, and then it's going to be a high scoring win, for him, and obviously low scoring for Strickland. But I like Strickland, to potentially put up 60 points in a loss if it goes to a 5 round decision, and Adesanya might only put up like 85.
If you and I don't like Haqparast so much, doesn't that make his opponent somewhat viable, Squirrel?
Well, yeah.
I mean, let's just say Quinones might have more volume, but the more powerful shots could be from Haqparast. Like, that's one thing I'm sniffing out here because we both don't like Haqparast. And if it's a close decision, who the hell knows? Nobody's, homeland here.
Yeah, I mean, so just my thoughts on this is, 9,500 versus 6,700 is a huge spread in pricing. And my thoughts on a 9,500 fighter that doesn't score a lot. It doesn't score well. I think Haqparast, still no 100-point DK scores in his game log. He could win the fight and just not get on the winning lineup, right? Like if he's not breaking 100 points, there's going to be probably 12 winners on this card. So 9,500 fighter that doesn't break 100 is going to be really difficult to get on that winning lineup. The flip side of that is Quinones at only 6,700 probably just needs a win. Like any kind of win is going to get you there at 6,700. I mean, how many? I'm always aiming for about 10x salary. So how many winners, score less than 67? Or it happens, but it doesn't happen that often. So Quinones has about a 20% chance of winning the fight. I've got him, actually own him for leverage a little bit more than that.
Yeah, and again, sometimes it's about playing those spots where, Haqparast is just going to get out volumed. Sometimes he gets out volumed, and I like a guy that those hidden scores where he just gets significant strikes adding up. But we don't have the women's fight. Where's the women's fight that we can, break down? That's the thing that's frustrating. I think we pretty much hit every single fight, but how are you building? It sounds like you're like me. And is that a contrarian thing to build mid-range? Because I can see people getting one of the two, like a Tuivasa or a Lane, and then, taking a main event piece and then hitting a mid-range? How are you going to build your lineups?
So I'm generally just fading the main event. I've got some of it, on my contests, but probably have more Strickland than Adesanya overall. And then once you put in, if you put in a 6,500 Strickland or a 6,700 Quinones, you're kind of fitting in an extra one of these 8,700 and up fighters. Got a lot of Austin Lane and Tai Tuivasa just because of the upside there. And then Gabriel Miranda probably got like 50%. I just haven't seen line movement like that.
We probably have to break down that fight, though, from the X's and O's. Miranda seems to be a first-round jiu-jitsu, get you out of there, catch a limb. It's going to be friendly for DraftKings scoring long-term at 7,600, and now with that line movement, like you said, ownership's going to be there. But Shane Young, actually, his wins in the UFC have been pretty damn strong, Squirrel. Like, he's got knockout power at any time.
Yeah, I mean, he's lost 3 fights in a row.
He's not good. Trust me, he is not good. Neither of these guys are. Let's be clear. Neither of them.
Yeah, you're getting a guy that's slightly favored now at 7,600, and I don't think the projections have updated, and I don't think everyone necessarily realizes that that Miranda is almost the favorite. I mean, I've seen it now with even odds, different places in DraftKings. I think was starting to tip slightly towards Miranda as the favorite. So I'm going overweight Miranda, just hoping for him to pull the fight out.
Yep. And TJ, you're building your first lineups in MMA. What the hell? What's your questions? You got to hit us with some questions. I mean, we got the YouTube chat open with questions. What are you thinking? You're muted.
Still muted.
Producer.
Classic. I'm supposed to be the one who's good at the tech with being the producer, but
no.
Here we are. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I don't know who my priorities should be. Who do I need to make sure I have in this one lineup I'm doing? Consider not necessarily optimally. I'm willing to be contrarian.
Yeah.
But
here's the thing. John brings up the good point. Main event is a starting point. People will start there. You're going to kill off 70-80% of the field if you fade it, John, and it busts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so usually, you want to start with a main event piece because it has the potential to go 5 rounds. Just Adesanya is a notoriously low-scoring fighter, and it really has a reputation as not scoring that well and his opponent not scoring a lot of points off of him. But really, because he's fighting 5-round fights to go to decision, like his opponents actually, put up very high loss scores, if that makes sense. And in this particular case, his opponent, because the odds are so lopsided, Strickland's only 6,500. So he's the cheapest fighter on the card, which brings up the possibility of something that doesn't happen often in UFC, but the losing fighter ends up on the winning lineup.
And TJ, Adesanya's 7-1 favorite. He's only -140 to win inside the distance. Like they expect it, 60% of the time to end. So if this thing goes to a decision, you're going to get a decent floor.
And I want to make sure I don't have 2 outside of maybe that one main event. Do I want to not be playing 2 people in the same fight? Correct?
Never.
Be making sure I'm picking winners.
Don't be nerdy tenor. What do you think about that last week, Squirrel?
Yeah, I just saw it on Twitter. I forget what happened exactly last week, but I saw it.
3 people had it.
Which way was it?
3 people had a stack of I'm trying to remember. It was a grappler versus a striker, and they accidentally stacked that fight, and it was optimal.
Yeah, I've done that before, but not one. Right?
Yeah,
accidentally stacked the fights, one of the fights, and not had it win. Is it the? I'm not sure which fight it was. Yeah, but that doesn't happen that often.
So I have 7,700 remaining. Do I just put Strickland in there and leave the salary, or is there somebody else that's cheap that I should like?
So you probably have one of the heavyweight underdogs, Tuivasa or Lane. That's your starting point, I would say, because that gives you the upside you need.
People from that fight are in my lineup. Both of those
Interesting.
fights.
Dare I say Blood Diamond? It seems like he could get not like any sort of win probably looks good for him, right, Squirrel?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if he wins the fight,
I got the other guy.
Yeah, then you can't.
That's the problem. I feel like I just got to go with the main event underdog. I don't know who else to put in, or the Quinones guy.
Well, we kind of talked ourselves into it. I mean, it could be worse. You could do a lot worse. He's kind of unknown too.
That's Quinones or Strickland. That's the question.
Strickland can get there in a loss. That's the
I
problem.
go Strickland.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
beautiful.
We're throwing it in. We're hoping for the best. We're closing our eyes, crossing our fingers.
Yeah, about 30 minutes until lock. I will retweet anything. I'm sure Squirrel will as well if there's anything that is canceled. We got our eyes out for those news offerings. And next week, Grasso versus Shevchenko. The rematch, 11 fights. It's gross, John. It's not.
Right.
There's a lot of things that have been canceled, but yeah. Producer TJ, thank you for hopping in. Thank you for producing, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. We will see you guys next week.
Good luck.